Hey there you lot, welcome back to Fat Glenn's Fish. This is part 4 of the series we're filming on the rebuild of my fish room. I'm replacing a rack in the centre of my room here, and it's a big job. We've got some more to talk about, and I'll see you on the other side for that. Rightio, let's talk about where we are. I've spent the bulk of this weekend getting the tanks out. I'll show you them outside in a sec, and dismantling the old rack completely. Must say it's nice to have a metre and a bit of aisle space to be able to look at the tanks on the right, but the tanks on the right are kind of scary as hell because they're full of extra filters and habitat that I needed to keep wet and hopefully keep the biologicals going in my filters. So the poor old fish in the right tanks are pretty crowded, and it's a bit scary because there's lack of visibility there, and I'm really on the clock to get this job done now so that I can get back to looking after these guys. Pulling the old crap out ended up being a much longer job than I had have hoped. The rack had been in situ for, I'd say, 14 odd years. I think I worked out that we were probably around 2011, 2012-ish when that rack went in. And whilst most of the timber was fine, a lot of the screws that held the thing together had, a bit of rust and whatnot, and I had all sorts of trouble getting screws out. And I had to be careful about how it all went because this entire rack here is now freestanding, and I didn't want to obviously be wrenching and reefing on things that could potentially get a wobble up in that, because that could have been a catastrophe. Down there we've got some of the rails that I've salvaged and will form part of the new build, and this stuff here will also possibly be used on, once I complete the rack we're on here now, I am going to be replacing this rack because I went against my better judgment about 10 years ago and installed this in steel, thinking that I would gain, like this is a 20 by 40 tube steel, and we thought that would sort of give me a tighter build, and it looked great for a time, but it's so scary. It's just rusting and flaking, and pieces are coming off everywhere, and screws are rusting out in that, so that's a ticking time bomb. Plus I've randomly lost fish over the journey in this rack, and I've never been able to pin it down to anything other than some of this flaky paint falling down and getting into the tanks at some stage and causing a poisoning event. So the follow-on from what we're about to complete on this rack is going to be that one's going to go, and then finally the last one I'll be back to timber throughout. And I would never recommend steel. Just cost, hard to work with if you don't have skills, and it rusts no matter how hard you try. Whereas the timber with this build that I'm going to go with, and ventilation, aeration around the materials, is going to give me 15 or 20 years, which is all I need at this stage. And out the back here, there's our new materials that are going to go in this afternoon, and I'll start trying to screw that together. Everywhere else is just crap. There's buckets full of rocks and bristlenose tunnels. We've got sand in buckets. We've got sand in ice cream containers because I ran out of buckets. We've got the tubs that I use for pulling tanks down that are completely chockers with rocks and ornaments, more sand or more ornaments in buckets. My salt buckets are outside, and we've got some rubbish, and we've got what is now 14 odd tanks on the back lawn here. And the next part of the job is to obviously get our rack built, and these 14 tanks that came out, only what have we got, 4, 5, 9 of these are going back in. So I've got four footers here that are the akin to the ones we've been renovating. These were the same style of tanks, sourced from the same chain store group a time ago, and obviously were installed and set up, and so those 4 will go back in, the 10 mil. Then I've got a couple of old 4 foots here. I'm going to resurrect one of those, which includes putting the glass rod technique into the corners, because most of these tanks along here have leaked on me. These were a bulk buy that I got from Sydney many years ago, and I got them cheap, but the way they were made was a little bit sus, and they've all eventually leaked. But I can redeem that with glass rod and new internal silicon. So out of the 8 3-footers here, 4 are going back into the shed. So we're looking at a spruce up on the paintwork, and just making sure all those internal silicons are up to scratch, and then I'll be scrapping the 4 4-footers I'm not going to use, and one of these 4-footers I'm going to pull apart. And you're probably thinking, hang on, why don't you sell those? And the reason I wouldn't sell them is that the average tyre kicker would only come in and argue over what they're worth, because they don't look great, and they'd talk you down to, I'll give you $20. And the reality of the situation with the cost of glass, if ever you've broken a lid or whatever and you need a bit of glass, go to the glazier and order that to cut to spec, and you'll find out why I wouldn't be any better off selling one of these tanks for $20. They're just way more use to me now as spare part glass, and they'll be my supply of lids in the event of damage for the rest of my journey. And as we saw in the last episode, I've got the means to cut that now, and that's where we're at. So next job after this is to start hauling this stack inside, and the fun part finally begins. Thursday evening, I'm getting ready to go in and settle in to watch my beloved Cats play tonight over at Freo. Probably going to get beat, but never mind. I have chipped away at this job this week in fits and starts, in the little gaps that I've had available, and we've got a fair bit done, and it's coming along pretty well. Hopefully now you might be able to sort of visualise the build. On the end here is one of our sheets of form ply, and this is one of the ones that was cut down by 12.5 centimetres, so we've got 107.5 centimetres across there, 1.8 metres tall, sitting on our brick. And I've sort of built the first section, so we've got a full sheet of melamine across the top, and we've got one of the pieces that I got cut in this first section. If I put my hand up top, it's sitting there nice and solid, and at this stage I've done zero work in terms of levelling this out, right? So I'm building effectively a big rectangular prism on this floor, and what remains, the big job to come, is going to be levelling this this rack out effectively to compensate for any hips and hollows in my concrete. Yeah, so far well happy with how it's gone. It's more or less it's come out nice and square on the corner there. That's square's not rocking at all. So that's the benefit of using manufactured materials that are obviously made very precisely and are square. It takes a bit of my poor carpentry skills out of the equation. We're sitting approximately level. It looks we're going to have to lift the left-hand end of our rack a little bit, and that's kind of what I'm expecting, because if ever I spill any water on the floor, it always ends up in this corner of the shed here. So that's the levelling process has got to happen. But once again, this end of the shed rack is sitting there quite nicely, and that's only going to get stiffer as I put in the remaining melamine. We're not even, these legs aren't even fixed off yet. Now interestingly, this end of the rack is giving me a little bit more trouble at this stage, which is kind of strange, because this, I believe this part of my slab is probably the flattest part. It's a lot easier to move this rack at the moment, but we've got a lot of screws to put in yet too, and where I'm struggling a little bit is in the midpoint of the shed here. That you see the line in the concrete there, that's the exact midpoint of my slab, and it's almost the exact midpoint of the rack we're building. It's a tiny bit to the left. My form ply panels, explain a bit better. So here, for example, is where one full panel is sitting next to one of our little off-cut pieces, and then onto the next full panel to make effectively a giant rectangle. And you'll see up the top where those meet, we're nice and flush, everything's good. And I've got the same scenario down here on the left hand end. We've got these melamine panels are fully fixed in the corners up under our rails. I can drill those from the other side. I cannot at this time drill to this central rail from the other side because the tanks are there and there's no gap. But when I pull those tanks out, I will effectively put a little spot. So if I'm to knock on the thing there, there is the ability for that to flex a tiny bit, whereas up here we're nice and solid. But what I'm struggling to do is this central joint there. You'll see we've got a little bit of a gap there, and I'm still trying to lever the whole right hand end of the rack so that we close that gap out. But it's only a few millimetres, and if I can't get it fully positioned in the end, it's not going to be a big deal. So the rack's coming together. The actual assembly of the fine tuning is going to be using some of these spacers which you can buy at Bunnings. These come in various thicknesses, and what I'm going to have to do is go around, and when I'm finished the build, I'm going to work on having all these bricks in place, and in the cases where we're sitting a bit low, it's easy, we can put a spacer in. They obviously want to be in there firmly and not come out when you're knocking them. But I think the problem I'm going to have is I'm probably going to end up having to put a decent amount of spacers down the left hand end, because as I said, I believe the floor goes down into that corner to compensate for this end. But I'm kind of considering utilising this joint here in the middle, and maybe having this end level and not necessarily fixing everything completely rock solid into the left hand end. I might allow this joint to sort of float a little bit. I've just got to work my way through it as I get this one finished on the right, and we'll see how all that goes probably tomorrow after I've got tomorrow off. And once the assembly's done, we're going to move pretty quickly then. The jobs to follow are going to be to cut holes through our melamine, through which I will plumb up from underneath into my tanks from a drainage. That's a messy job. We'll do that next once the building's complete, and then I will be redoing aeration. It's going to be so much easier to put our aeration back in before we've got the tanks in, and that'll involve maybe a little bit of drilling and screwing, so a little bit more dust, and then I'll reinstall my lighting up underneath, which is just minimal, just some tiny little screws. And once all that's done, I'll get the vacuum out and some wet cloth, and we'll get it all nice and clean, and we'll smack some paint on this timber. It did dry out nicely sitting up on the back deck in storage for that month, so it's going to paint well, and that'll be that. Then we'll be able to start filing some tanks back in, and that'll leave us with plumbing. So there's still some steps to work through, but it's progress, slow but sure. This painting project has gone on for absolutely ever. I had all manner of trouble getting the paint off these things. The paint was so hard that I couldn't use the scraper as I'd like to, so I had to basically do it all with just brute force and holding the blade in fingers, and it was shocking work. They've been ready to paint for about 4 days, and unfortunately I haven't copped the right set of circumstance for painting at this time of year, with around the solstice. We're only a couple of days on from solstice down here, the shortest day, and we don't get sun till about 10 a.m. in the morning because of this tree here, and then the sun traverses across and it starts to get very low at about 3:30, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So no sun on the glass for a good chunk of the day. It's about 8:30 a.m. at the moment, and we've had a massive frost overnight, so even when the sun hits this, it's going to take a few hours today probably to get these clean and dry. Ready to paint. Can't wait to get on with it. I'm probably going to end up having to do these a couple at a time in my fish room. And now it's time to go and walk Elwood because he's sick of waiting. It just goes on. Big tip: whenever you're working with your polyethylene drip irrigation line, I'm working with 19mm, I believe it is, 3/4 inch tubing. It's way easier to work with if it's warm, right? That stuff I showed you earlier with the frost on the glass, you wouldn't want to bring a roll of this stuff in from your garden shed where it's sitting at less than 5 degrees, and then try and work with it in this warm room, right? Because that's just going to be a recipe for getting kinks, and it's just hard yakka. You've all probably experienced that thing in the garden where you turn on your hose when it's been lying in the sun in a coil, and that first bit of water is hot enough to take a shower out of, and the hose is floppy as all get out. You want this stuff to be more pliable when you're working on it. I've put my length of hose up in this rack in particular, and it's a great time if you can to get a little bit of help with it. You don't want to just stand at one end and reef on the coil, because the chances are it's going to
fall over, and you're going to, rather than pulling it off the coil like I guess line off a fishing reel, it's just going to flip over and you're going to end up putting a twist in it, which is probably not going to create an issue tear wise or anything, but it's just nice to do things slowly with this. So if you can get a friend to help you, just feed that off the coil as you work with it, I'd be doing that. So that's a big tip. Work with this stuff when it's warm and pliable. When the stuff is warm, it's not too difficult to force onto your elbows and your fittings. But if you're having trouble, and this is a good tip for any time you're working with hoses, whether it's fitting a garden hose to fittings or air lines, get a cup of stinking hot water. Go boil the kettle, come out with some hot water in a small bucket or whatever, and you dip your ends of your hoses in. You're going to get them pliable and they're going to be super easy to push on. The other thing I'd maybe advocate for is go buy yourself a hose cutting tool at Bunnings. Just makes it way easier to cut your hose just nice and slowly, and you've got a beautiful square edge there, which is what we want for this particular job. I've already sort of roughly got this T-piece in place, so we're running our horizontal from it. We're going down to the shelf beneath, and I'm going to be going up to the shelf above. I am going to be able to get this on, I believe, just with gentle force, a little bit of a twisting action, and that's got us all the way onto our barbed fitting. The other one's just got a little bit further to go, and that's ready to go, this fitting. Now you can use the little ratcheted style clamps. I'm going to put one on this length because I'm going to be putting a fair bit of tension on that to just to get that hose nice and straight. Basically, I don't want this flopping around on top of my tanks. Multi-grips is probably a good way to get extra pressure on, but you just want enough clicks that is now well crimped onto your barb, and that ain't going to go anywhere. Finally, we're just going to run our hose up to the shelf above, trying not to kink here obviously, and out through the bottom below. I've cut these a bit longer so that I can get my lengths right up there, and then the next thing is we're going to use our little stirrups. This is actually a stirrup that electricians would use with running conduit. I've got one of these screwed up on the end of my line, and as I said, I'm going to tension this hose to the other end of the system. So I've gone with one of these at the end. I got these years ago from another job, just because they're a little bit thicker and stronger than the black polyethylene stuff, which I've used along the rest of the span just to hold the thing up. Whereas this one I want to be able to put a bit of grunt against. And I've just pulled my screw out, so I've literally just got to screw this in up here, and once I've got that locked off, which is not easy to do when I'm not watching, I'll get that T-piece firmly in place now, and that'll give me something to pull against in all directions. We'll end up with a nice herringbone style of air running across the tops of all four of these rows of tanks, and then we'll that'll be it until the tanks go in, and the final part of the job is then I will just spike in some taps nicely corresponding with all the places where I want a sponge filter or an egg tumbler or whatnot to run. So show you that a bit later.
So this is how our stirrup ends up looking in place. This is the T-piece. We've got our horizontal span along the middle row of my rack, and we've got air going up and down. I haven't pinned those off yet. I just thought I'd show you how this goes. So that stirrup is now screwed in nice and tight. And a tip for getting your airline sort of tensioned a little bit towards the other end of the rack is to tighten it at each stirrup point under a bit of tension. So you kind of reach in and have hold of your hose and then tighten off your screws, because that stirrup will pull down pretty tight. So you knock down the end there trying to tension the whole thing in one go, right? So we've got the first 1.2 metre span tensioned, across to the next one, tension that, down to the third one, tension that. So 3/4 of that line is the way it's going to end up, and that brings us down to this end where we've got the final piece that will go up into this top corner, and you're just not trying to fight against all of that span there. So that's how the airline works. I've still got to finish the lower loop, and we're going to do the same job along the top here where that piece is sitting there floppy. I've got to cut this abomination off up here, and I've got a more sophisticated, simple version made up down here on the bench, which will go up. It'll be just right at the death. I'll do that job quickly, and I'll have a whole fresh airline. So I reckon that's probably enough. You don't need to see me painting that rack, but I'll hopefully drop in at the beginning of the next video with a much more exciting looking rack of tanks to show you. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in that next one.